The last thing my son said to me before he drove away was, "Mom, stay here. I'll be back." His taillights disappeared into the white wall of snow. I was 68 years old, standing alone on a mountain road in Colorado, with temperatures dropping by the minute. My phone was nearly dead. My emergency coat was locked inside his SUV. And for the first time in my life, I was afraid that my own son had left me there to die. Hours later, Sheriff Robert Mitchell found me barely conscious beneath a cluster of pine trees. But when Michael arrived, he told the sheriff something completely different. Sheriff Mitchell stared at him and asked one question. "If your mother left the vehicle on her own, why was her emergency coat still locked inside your SUV?" Michael said nothing. "If stories like this touch something deep in your heart, please stay with me. Like this video if you believe family should mean safety, not fear. Subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Katherine's story. And I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Most importantly, tell me, honestly, if you were Katherine, would you believe your son's story? 3 weeks before the blizzard, I still believed my son would never intentionally hurt me. That sentence is difficult for me to write even now. Because when you are a mother, you don't wake up one morning and decide that your child has become a stranger. You make excuses first. You remember the little boy he used to be. You remember scraped knees, school lunches, Christmas mornings, and the first time he reached for your hand because he was afraid. You remember everything that came before the betrayal, and you hold on to those memories because they are easier to believe than the truth. My name is Katherine Evans. I was 68 years old, widowed for nearly 4 years, and living alone in the mountain home. My husband James and I had built our life around. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly large. It was an old cedar-sided house tucked into the foothills outside a small Colorado mountain community with a steep driveway, a weathered porch, and a view of pine-covered ridges that turned almost blue at sunset. James used to joke that the house had more personality than either of us. He was probably right. Every room carried a piece of him. The dent in the kitchen cabinet came from the year he tried to install a new dishwasher himself. The scratch across the hallway floor came from when Michael was 12 and dragged a broken bicycle inside after a snowstorm. And the little brass hook beside the front door was where James always hung his keys. Even after he died, I couldn't bring myself to move it. Some habits become monuments when the person who created them is gone. I had learned how to live with the quiet. Some evenings, I would sit by the fireplace with a cup of tea and listen to the wind move through the trees. Other nights, I would cook enough food for 2 without thinking, then laugh sadly when I realized what I had done. I wasn't helpless. That was important to me. I paid my own bills. I drove into town. I shoveled the front steps when the snow came. I kept the house in order. And most importantly, I made my own decisions. Michael knew that. At least I thought he did. I was 43 and lived about an hour and a half away with his wife and 2 children. He worked in commercial construction and had always been ambitious. When he was young, he had wanted to build things. I used to tell everyone that my son could turn a pile of scrap wood into something useful. He was clever. He was persuasive, and when he looked at me with that familiar smile, I could still see the little boy who used to run across our backyard with his arms open. That's why I didn't question it when he started visiting more often. At first, I was happy. One Saturday morning, he arrived with a paper bag full of groceries. "Thought you could use some of this," he said. I smiled. "You remembered I like those apples." "Of course I did, Mom." He kissed my cheek. That tiny gesture made me feel foolish for ever worrying that we had grown apart. We spent the afternoon talking. Or rather, I thought we were talking. Looking back, I realized Michael was asking questions. A lot of questions. How much longer are you planning to stay here? I laughed. Until they carry me out. He didn't laugh. I'm serious. So am I. He looked toward the window. This place is pretty isolated. I've lived here for 26 years. I know. What are you getting at? Nothing. I'm just saying things are different now. I put another log into the fireplace. What things? Your age? Mom. There was something about those two words that bothered me. Not because I was ashamed of being 68. I wasn't. But because he said them as if my age had suddenly erased everything I had spent decades learning. I looked at him. I'm still me. I know you're still you. Then why are you talking to me like I'm not? He sighed. I'm worried about you. That was the first explanation. Concern. At least, that's what I called it. Over the next few weeks, he kept bringing up the house. He asked whether I had ever gotten it appraised. He asked if the property taxes had increased. He asked whether the land was still entirely in my name. Once, while we were drinking coffee in the kitchen, he casually asked, Did Dad ever put anything in writing about the property? I looked at him over my mug. Why? Just curious. Your father had a will. I know. Then why are you asking? He shrugged. No reason. I let it go. That was what mothers do sometimes. We let things go because we don't want every conversation to become an interrogation. But something had changed. I started noticing that Michael rarely asked how I was sleeping. He rarely asked whether my knee was bothering me. He rarely asked whether I needed groceries. Instead, he asked about documents, insurance, property, savings, the house. One afternoon, he stood in the hallway, looking at an old framed photograph of James and me. Dad really loved this place, he said. He did. He could have sold it years ago. He never wanted to. Michael nodded. Then he said something that stayed with me. Maybe he should have. I turned toward him. What does that mean? Nothing. Michael. He rubbed his forehead. Mom, I'm just saying this house is worth a lot more than you think. I know what it's worth. Do you? Yes. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. I'm only trying to help. I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because believing your child is easier than suspecting him. A few days later, Michael brought up the idea of moving. He said there was a nice assisted living community closer to town. I immediately said no. I don't need assisted living. You don't have to call it that. What would you call it? A safer place? I am safe here. You're alone. So are millions of people my age. That's different. How? He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward the window and looked out at the long driveway. Then he said quietly, If something happened to you, I'd never forgive myself. That sentence almost broke my resistance. Almost, because beneath the frustration, I could hear something that sounded like fear. And I thought maybe my son really was worried. So I softened. I appreciate that, I said. But I'm not ready to leave. His jaw tightened. Why are you so stubborn? I stared at him. There it was, the first crack. Concern had turned into frustration. Frustration had turned into pressure. And pressure was beginning to sound like entitlement. Still, I didn't think he would hurt me. I didn't think he would lie to me. I certainly didn't think he would one day leave me alone in a blizzard. At that point, I was still trying to protect the image of my son that lived inside my heart. I didn't know that Michael was already carrying a problem I couldn't see, a problem involving money, a problem involving his business, and eventually, a problem involving my house. One evening, after he left, I stood at the kitchen sink and watched his headlights disappear down the driveway. I remember whispering to myself, "He's just worried about me." I repeated those words because they made everything feel normal. But deep down, something had begun to whisper a different truth. Michael wasn't looking at me like a son looking at his mother anymore. I was looking at my house like a man looking at an answer to a problem. And I had no idea how dangerous that difference would become. By the time winter settled over Colorado, I had stopped pretending that Michael's visits were only about checking on me. Something had changed between us. It wasn't one dramatic argument. It wasn't one cruel sentence that suddenly turned my son into a stranger. It happened slowly. A question here, a suggestion there, a sigh whenever I refused. And each time, I told myself the same thing. He's worried about me. He's under pressure. He's my son. I kept searching for reasons to forgive behavior that I didn't yet understand. Then, one Saturday afternoon, Michael arrived without calling first. I was standing in the kitchen peeling potatoes for dinner when I heard the front door open. "Mom, I'm in here." He walked into the kitchen wearing a dark winter jacket, his face tense. "You should have called," I said. "I was nearby." "You're never just nearby." He didn't smile. I wiped my hands on a towel and studied him. "What happened?" "It happened nothing. Michael." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "We need to talk about this house." My stomach tightened. "We've talked about it." "No, you've avoided talking about it." I slowly sat across from him. "I've told you I'm not selling." "Why?" "Because it's my home. You don't need this much space. I've lived here for 26 years, and you're getting older." There it was again. That word. Older. Not wiser. Not experienced. Older. I looked at him carefully. "Do you think I'm incapable of taking care of myself?" "I didn't say that." "You keep implying it. Because I'm worried?" His voice echoed through the kitchen. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he lowered his voice. "Mom, please. Just listen." I nodded. "I am listening." He leaned forward. "This house is worth a lot of money." "I know. You could sell it, move somewhere safer, and have enough money left over to live comfortably for the rest of your life." "I already live comfortably. That's not the point." "Then, what is the point?" He looked away. That silence told me more than his words had. I folded my hands on the table. "Are you asking me to sell my house because you need money?" His eyes snapped back to mine. "No." The answer came too quickly. I noticed. "Michael," I said, "no." "Then why are you pushing this so hard?" He stood. "Because I'm trying to help you." "You're not helping me. You're trying to make me do something I don't want to do." His face hardened. "You've always been like this." "Like what, stubborn?" I felt something inside me go cold. I built my life here. Dad built your life here. I stared at him. "What did you say?" "You heard me. My husband and I built this home together." Michael shook his head. "Dad made the money. Dad handled the business. Dad took care of everything. And I took care of you." He looked at me. I could see the anger in his eyes. For 1 second, I saw the little boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. Then I saw the man standing in my kitchen. And I realized I didn't recognize that man. "You think I don't remember what Mom did," he said. "What does that mean, you always protected Dad? Because he was your father." "You protected him from everything." I frowned. I don't understand. Of course you don't. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I'm leaving. Michael, wait. He stopped. I stood. If you're in trouble, tell me. He didn't turn around. If you need help, I'll listen. Still nothing. Michael. He finally looked back. For a moment, his anger disappeared. I saw fear. Real fear. It was there for only a second. Then it vanished. I don't need your help. He walked out. The door slammed behind him. I stood in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade down the porch. I wanted to run after him. I wanted to tell him that whatever was happening, he could tell me. That I was still his mother. That I would never turn my back on him. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe somewhere deep inside, I already knew that giving him money would not solve whatever was wrong. That evening, I barely ate. I sat beside the fireplace and looked at an old photograph of Michael at 16. He was standing beside James, both of them covered in sawdust, after building a small storage shed in the backyard. Michael had been so proud. James had one arm around his shoulders. I touched the glass. What happened to you? I whispered. I didn't expect an answer. But the next morning, I found one clue. It came in the form of a piece of paper. I was sorting through the mail when I noticed an envelope addressed to Michael. He had accidentally left it on the kitchen counter during his last visit. I knew I shouldn't open it, so I didn't, but I saw the return address. It was from a commercial lender. My heart sank. Michael had a business loan. That wasn't unusual. But there was something about the envelope that made me uneasy. I put it aside. Later that day, I called him. He answered after several rings. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded tired. I found something of yours here. What an envelope. There was silence. What envelope? The one from the lender? His voice changed. Did you open it? No. Good. That one word made my heart beat faster. Michael, are you having financial problems? No. You don't have to lie to me. I'm not lying. You are. He sighed. Mom, I can handle my own problems. I know you can. But if you're in trouble, you don't have to face it alone. I said I'm fine. Then he hung up. I sat there holding the phone. I had never heard him sound so frightened. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Michael called more often, but almost every conversation eventually returned to the house. He asked whether I had considered renting it. He asked whether I would let him manage the property. He asked where James kept the original deed. He even asked whether I had updated my will. That question disturbed me more than the others. Why do you need to know about my will? I asked. I'm your son. That doesn't answer my question. He laughed nervously. Mom, don't make this weird. I didn't make it weird. You're acting like I have some hidden agenda. Do you? Silence. Then he said, I have to go. He hung up. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept our important documents. The deed was there. The insurance papers were there. My will was there. Everything appeared untouched. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been looking. A week later, Michael came to my house again. This time, he brought a folder. He placed it on my kitchen table. What is that information? I don't need information. Just look at it. I opened the folder. Inside were listings for properties near town. Small homes, condos, senior communities, places Michael had apparently chosen for me. You've been looking at houses for me? Yes. Without asking, I was trying to make things easier. I closed the folder. I don't want to move. Mom, no. You're making a mistake. No, I'm making a choice. His expression changed. You're going to regret this. The words were quiet. Too quiet. I looked at him. Are you threatening me? He immediately shook his head. No. Then don't speak to me like that. He stood there for several seconds. Then he picked up the folder. You'll understand someday. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around. There's supposed to be a storm next week. I know. You shouldn't be alone here. I've survived worse winters than that. This one is different. I smiled sadly. They always say that. He didn't smile back. He simply left. I watched him drive away, and for the first time, I felt something stronger than suspicion. I felt fear. Not fear that Michael would hurt me. Not yet. I was afraid that whatever was happening inside my son's life was becoming bigger than his ability to control it. And I was afraid that my house, the home where I had raised him, loved him, and buried my husband, had somehow become the solution to a problem I hadn't created. I just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go to get it. And I certainly didn't know that within days, I would climb into his SUV believing I was going on a simple trip with my son and end up fighting for my life in the middle of a blizzard. The week after Michael left my house, I tried to convince myself that our argument had been nothing more than a bad day between a mother and her grown son. Families argue. Children disappoint their parents. Parents say things they regret. That was what I told myself while I folded laundry, paid my bills, and watched the first flakes of snow begin to fall outside my kitchen window. But I couldn't forget Michael's face, or the way he had said, "This one is different." The weather forecast predicted a major winter storm moving through the mountains. I had lived in Colorado long enough to respect those warnings. When the roads became dangerous, I stayed home. It was simple. But 3 days before the storm was expected to arrive, Michael called me. Mom. His voice sounded different, calmer, almost warm. Hi, honey. I've been thinking about our argument. I sat down at the kitchen table. So have I. I shouldn't have yelled at you. I closed my eyes for a moment. Those words were exactly what I had been hoping to hear. You don't have to apologize for being worried about me, I said. I wasn't fair. No, you weren't. He laughed softly. I guess I deserved that. I smiled despite myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Then he said, I'd like to make it up to you. Remember the old cabin? I looked toward the window. The one near Pine Ridge, yeah. James and I had used that cabin years ago. It wasn't ours anymore, but the property had remained in the family for a long time before being transferred to another owner. Michael occasionally helped maintain some of the surrounding property for a friend. What about it, I asked. I need to check something up there before winter gets worse. Then go. I was hoping you'd come with me. I laughed. Why? Because I want to spend some time with you. That sentence reached a part of me that the arguments had wounded. I hadn't realized how badly I wanted to hear it. You want me to come? Yeah, just the two of us, just us. I hesitated. Michael, the weather isn't good. We'll be back before the storm. You're sure? Absolutely. He sounded so confident that my concern began to fade. Maybe this was what we needed. Maybe we needed time away from the house, away from bills, away from arguments. Maybe Michael wasn't trying to take something from me. Maybe he was simply struggling. Maybe I had been too suspicious. That evening, I called him again. Are you sure about tomorrow, Mom? I promise. All right. I'll pick you up at 9. Don't be late. He laughed. I won't. I smiled after hanging up. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid, because I was hopeful. I laid out my clothes for the morning and packed a small bag. I even found an old photograph of Michael and James that I had been meaning to put into a new frame. I thought perhaps I would bring it with me. Maybe we'd talk. Maybe I could finally ask Michael what was really happening. Maybe he would tell me about his business. Maybe he would let me help him. I wanted my son back. I didn't understand then that Michael wasn't coming to repair our relationship. At least, not entirely. The next morning, he arrived at exactly 9. I watched his SUV pull into the driveway. When he stepped out, he was smiling. Ready? I opened the front door. Give me 5 minutes. He carried my bag to the vehicle. That small gesture touched me. You're getting thoughtful in your old age, I teased. He smiled. I'm trying. I locked the house behind me. Before getting into the SUV, I turned around and looked at the porch. Something inside me whispered that I should stay. I ignored it. The drive started peacefully. Michael played an old country station on the radio. For nearly 40 minutes, neither of us talked much. Snow covered the trees along the highway. The farther we drove, the quieter everything became. Eventually I said, How's the business? He kept his eyes on the road. Better. Really? Yeah, that makes me happy. Thanks. I watched him for a moment. You know you can tell me the truth. I know, even if it's bad. He nodded. I know, Mom, but he didn't say anything else. About 20 minutes later, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen. He didn't answer. Who was that work? Everything okay? Yeah. A few minutes later, it rang again. This time, Michael rejected the call. His jaw tightened. Michael, I said it's fine. His tone was sharper than I expected. I looked out the window. All right. The road became narrower. The snow grew heavier. I checked the weather on my phone. A winter storm warning had been upgraded. Michael, what this looks bad. We're almost there. Shouldn't we turn around? No. He said it immediately. Too immediately. I looked at him. Why not? Because the cabin isn't far. Are you sure the roads will be clear? They're fine. I watched snow collect along the windshield. The wipers moved constantly. For several minutes, we drove without speaking. Then Michael's phone rang again. This time he answered. Yeah, I couldn't hear the other voice. Michael listened. His expression changed. No, not today. Another pause. I said, I'll handle it. He ended the call. I turned toward him. Is that your business partner? Yeah. What does he want? Money. The word hung between us. I waited. Michael sighed. I have a payment coming due. How much more than I want to talk about? You could have told me. I didn't want to. Why? Because I knew you'd offer to help. I would, I know. There was pain in his voice. I reached over and touched his arm. You're my son. He swallowed. I know. If you're in trouble, we can figure it out. He shook his head. No, Mom. Why not? Because it's not that simple. I didn't push him. But his words frightened me. We continued toward the mountains. The snow was falling harder now. The world outside the windows had become almost entirely white. Suddenly, Michael slowed down. What happened? I asked. Visibility. We should turn around. We can't. Why? He didn't answer. I looked at the road behind us. It was already disappearing beneath fresh snow. For the first time, I felt genuinely uneasy. Michael, I don't think we should be going any farther. We're almost there. How much farther? 20 minutes. I looked at the dashboard clock, then at my phone. No signal. That bothered me. Do you have enough gas, plenty? He said it without looking at me. Another phone call came through. Michael pulled the phone from the console. He glanced at the screen. This time, he didn't answer. Instead, he turned the phone face down. Who is it, nobody? Nobody doesn't call 3 times. He said nothing. I stared at him. Something had shifted. The warmth from that morning was gone. The man beside me had become distant, focused, almost impatient. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. I wanted to believe my son was simply worried about his business. But the farther we drove into the mountains, the stronger the feeling became that I had made a mistake by coming. Then Michael spoke. We'll stay at the cabin for a little while until the weather passes. I looked at him. You said we'd be back before the storm. He didn't answer. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Thick, silent, relentless. And somewhere deep inside me, a voice I had ignored for weeks finally became impossible to silence. Go home. I should have listened, because that was the last moment I could still turn around. A few hours later, there would be no road back, no easy way out, and no way for me to know that Michael had already made a decision that would change both of our lives forever. By the time we reached the mountain road leading toward the cabin, the storm had become much worse. Snow whipped across the windshield so violently that the headlights barely seemed useful. The world outside had disappeared into a moving wall of white. I kept one hand against the dashboard and watched Michael drive. Are you sure you know where you're going? Yes. His answer was short, too short. I looked down at the road map on my phone, but there was no signal. Michael, I really think we should turn around. We're too far in. Then we should stop somewhere safe. There isn't anywhere safe. His words made my stomach tighten. A few minutes later, the SUV began sliding. Michael immediately slowed down. The tires struggled against the snow. Michael, I've got it. The vehicle moved sideways for a moment before finally stopping. We both sat silently. The engine continued running. I could hear the heater blowing warm air against the windshield. Are we stuck? I asked. Not completely. What does that mean? It means I need to check the tires. You're going outside just for a minute. I looked at the snow blowing across the road. You shouldn't. I'll be fine. Michael, wait until the snow slows down. He unbuckled his seatbelt. I need to see what's happening. Before opening the door, he looked at me. Stay here. I nodded. Lock the doors. I will. He stepped outside. The door slammed shut. Within seconds, he disappeared into the snow. I watched through the windshield. His dark jacket became a shadow. Then even that disappeared. I waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. I started feeling nervous. I tried calling him. The call didn't go through. I tried again. Nothing. I looked at the fuel gauge. There was enough gas. The heater was still working. I told myself everything was fine. Then I saw Michael walking back toward the SUV. Relief washed over me, but he didn't get inside. He walked around the driver's side, opened the door, and leaned inside. What happened? I asked. We're stuck. Can you get us out? Not from here. My heart sank. What? There may be a service road ahead. In this weather, we don't have much choice. I looked toward the passenger window. Snow was already piling against the vehicle. Can't we call for help? No signal. You have a radio. It's not working. I frowned. You checked, yes. He shut the driver's door. For some reason, I noticed he wasn't wearing gloves. Where are your gloves in the back? Get them. I'll be fine. Michael. He looked at me. Mom. I'm not a child. I know you're not. Then stop worrying. He started the engine again. The SUV moved forward. For several minutes, we crawled along the road. Then we stopped again. This time, the tires spun. Michael tried reversing. Nothing. He tried moving forward. The vehicle barely moved. Finally, he shut off the engine. We're done. I stared at him. What does that mean? We can't go any farther. So we wait here. He didn't answer. We wait for the storm to pass, I continued. He looked toward the windshield. That could take hours. Then we wait hours. He rubbed his face. I need to get to the cabin. Why I have to take care of something? What? It's complicated. I stared at him. Michael, nothing is more important than getting through this storm safely. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the center console and pulled out his phone. There was finally one bar of signal. He immediately made a call. I listened. Yeah, I'm here. Pause. No, I can't get there. Another pause. Listen to me. I'll handle it. His voice was low. I couldn't hear the other person. Then Michael said something that made my heart stop. I just need a little more time. He ended the call. Who is that work? You said that before. Because it's true. What do they want? He stared at me. Money. I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. How much, Mom, please? How much? He looked away. I don't want to talk about it. You brought me out here. What does that have to do with anything? Everything. He didn't answer. I suddenly remembered all those conversations at my kitchen table. The questions about my house. The questions about my savings. The questions about my will. The folder of properties he had chosen for me. A cold feeling moved through my body. Michael. What did you bring me here? Because of the house? His expression changed. No. You hesitated. I didn't. You did. He turned toward me. You think everything is about money. Because lately, everything you say seems to come back to money. He stared at me for a long time. Then he looked away. We'll talk about it later. I knew then that something was wrong, but I still didn't understand how wrong. The storm intensified. Snow accumulated around the vehicle. Michael checked his phone again. Then he looked toward the road. I need to get out. What, I need to walk to the cabin? You can't be serious. It's not far. Then we both go. No. Why not? Because you won't make it. I felt insulted. I've lived through Colorado winters longer than you've been alive. This isn't a normal storm. Then we stay together. He shook his head. I need to move quickly. You're leaving me here. Just for a little while. No. Katherine. I froze. He almost never called me Katherine. He always called me Mom. Don't do this. I have no choice. You always have a choice. He looked at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then his expression softened. Mom, listen to me. He reached over and touched my hand. I'll be back. I pulled my hand away. Take me with you. I can't. Why, you'll slow me down. The words cut deeper than he could have known. I stared at him. I'll slow you down. That's not what I meant. Yes, it is. He sighed. I just need you to stay here. I looked at the back seat. My emergency bag was gone. I remembered packing it. I had put it beside my suitcase that morning. Where's my emergency bag? Michael didn't answer. Michael, it's in the back. Where? He pointed toward the rear compartment. I tried to open it. Locked. Why is it locked? Because things could shift around. Unlock it. I'll get it when I come back. I stared at him. Something was terribly wrong. Give me my coat. What? What, my emergency coat? He looked at me. It's in the back, too. Then unlock the compartment. I said I'll get it. His voice had become hard. I reached for the door handle. I'm coming with you. He grabbed my wrist. Mom, don't. I pulled away. Don't touch me. He immediately released me. The silence inside the SUV became unbearable. Then he opened his door. Cold air rushed into the cabin. Stay here. Michael. He stepped outside. Michael, wait. He closed the door. I watched him walk around the front of the vehicle. Then he opened the driver's door. He looked at me one last time. I expected him to say he was sorry. I expected him to tell me he would come back. Instead, he said quietly, I'm doing what I have to do. Then he closed the door. The engine started. I stared at him through the windshield. Michael. The SUV began moving. At first, I thought he was simply repositioning it. Then it accelerated. Michael, I screamed. He kept driving. The red taillights grew smaller. Michael, stop! I slammed my hand against the window. He didn't stop. The vehicle disappeared into the snow. And suddenly, I understood. He wasn't going to the cabin. He wasn't looking for help. He was leaving me, alone, in the middle of a blizzard. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. One bar of signal had disappeared. I tried calling him. Nothing. Again, nothing. I looked toward the back of the SUV. My emergency coat was locked inside. My bag was locked inside. The radio was gone. The charger was gone. And my son was gone. For several seconds, I simply sat there. I couldn't make my mind accept what my eyes had witnessed. I whispered the only word I could think of. Why no answer came, only the wind. Then the snow began covering the tracks Michael had left behind. Within minutes, they were disappearing, just like he wanted them to. I opened the passenger door. The freezing wind struck my face. I stepped out, and for the first time in my 68 years, I stood alone in a storm, wondering whether my own child had just left me there to die. The first thing I remember thinking after Michael drove away was that this had to be a mistake. There had to be some explanation. Maybe he had panicked. Maybe the SUV had been sliding, and he thought moving forward was the only way to keep us from getting buried. Maybe he would realize what he had done and come back. I stood beside the abandoned vehicle, staring at the place where his taillights had disappeared. Michael! My voice vanished almost immediately into the storm. No answer. I tried calling him again. The screen showed no service. I lifted the phone toward the sky, as if that could somehow bring a signal back. Nothing. The wind pushed against me so hard that I had to lean against the SUV. That was when I realized how cold I really was. My coat was not designed for a night in the mountains. It was warm enough for an ordinary winter day, but not for a blizzard. My gloves were thin. My boots were already soaked from the snow. And my emergency coat, the heavy insulated one, James had insisted I keep in the vehicle. Every winter was locked inside the SUV. I tried the rear door. Locked. I pulled the handle again. Nothing. I went to the driver's side. Locked. Michael had taken the keys. Of course he had. I stood there with my hand against the frozen window. For a moment, I thought about breaking the glass. But I had no tool. And even if I managed to get inside, the keys were gone. I stepped away from the vehicle. The snow was already covering my footprints. That frightened me more than anything. I looked down the road. There was no road anymore. Only white. Only wind. Only darkness. I knew I couldn't stay there. If I remained beside the SUV, the cold would eventually take me. So I started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I needed shelter. I remembered Michael mentioning an old service road somewhere beyond the trees. Maybe he had been telling the truth. Maybe there really was a cabin nearby. I forced myself forward. One step, then another. My boots sank deep into the snow. Every few seconds, I had to stop and catch my breath. I pulled my scarf tighter around my face. The cold burned my cheeks. I tried to think logically. Find shelter. Stay dry. Keep moving. Don't panic. James had taught me those words years ago. Whenever we traveled into the mountains, he always said, "Fear makes you rush. Rushing makes you careless." I heard his voice in my head as clearly as if he were walking beside me. So I slowed down. I looked for trees. Pine trees could provide some protection from the wind. I found a cluster of them and moved beneath their branches. The snow was slightly thinner there. I brushed away a patch of ground and sat for a moment. My hands were trembling. I looked at my phone. The battery was down to 6%. I opened the emergency screen. No signal. I tried 911 anyway. The call failed. I tried again. Nothing. I closed my eyes. Please. I didn't know whether I was praying or simply begging the universe. I wasn't ready to die. Not there, not alone, and not because my own son had left me. I thought about James. I thought about the last conversation we had before he died. He had been lying in our bedroom weak, but still trying to make me laugh. He had squeezed my hand and said, "Promise me you'll keep living." I had promised. That promise suddenly felt like a rope I could hold on to. I stood again. I had to keep moving. The trees stretched up the mountain. I walked slowly between them. After perhaps 15 minutes, I saw something on the ground. At first, I thought it was a piece of trash. I bent down. It was a flashlight, a small black flashlight. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to Michael. I had carried it in his truck for years. I picked it up and pressed the button. A weak beam appeared. My heart sank. Why would Michael leave this behind? I looked around. There were footprints nearby. Fresh ones. His footprints. They led away from the road and toward the trees. I followed them. The snow was already filling them in, but I could still see the direction. Michael had been here. He hadn't simply driven away without knowing where he was going. I had walked through this area before. That realization frightened me. He knew this place. He knew the roads. He knew the weather. And he knew what could happen to someone out here. I kept following the footprints. The flashlight flickered. 3%. I switched it off. I would need the battery later. My hands were numb. My legs felt heavy. Then I saw something else. A strip of bright orange fabric caught on a low branch. I pulled it free. It was part of an emergency blanket. I recognized it from my own emergency bag. I stared at it. My heart began pounding. My bag had been in the rear compartment. If Michael had taken something from it, why I suddenly remembered the morning before we left. I had packed everything myself. The emergency bag had contained water, a blanket hand warmers, a small first aid kit, and a battery-powered radio. I had seen it in the back of the SUV. Now it was gone. Michael had access to it, and he knew exactly what was inside. I looked back toward the road. There was no sign of the SUV. The storm had erased everything. I felt a wave of anger rise inside me. It was almost easier than fear. "How could you?" I whispered. "How could you do this to me?" The wind answered. I kept walking. Eventually, I found an old structure tucked behind a line of trees. It wasn't a cabin. It was some kind of abandoned equipment shelter. The roof was damaged, but 3 walls were still standing. It was the closest thing to shelter I had seen. I stumbled inside. The floor was covered in old leaves and dirt, but there was no wind. That was enough. I sat against the wall. My body began shaking violently. I knew that wasn't good. I rubbed my hands together. I moved my feet. I forced myself to stay awake. "Don't sleep." I repeated it over and over. "Don't sleep, Katherine." I thought about Michael again. Despite everything, I still wondered if he would return. A mother can be abandoned and still hope. That's the cruelest part. Even when someone hurts you, love doesn't disappear on command. I remembered him as a little boy. He had been 7 when he first saw snow this deep. James had built a little snow fort in the yard. Michael had spent the entire afternoon throwing snowballs at his father. I had watched them from the porch laughing. Michael had looked at me and shouted, "Mom, come help me." And I had gone. I had always gone. Every birthday, every school play, every scraped knee, every mistake, every time he called, I had gone. And now, when I needed him, he had gone in the opposite direction. My eyes filled with tears. I wiped them away. I couldn't waste energy crying. I had to survive. Hours seemed to pass. I had no way to know the time. The storm continued. Sometimes the wind became so loud that the shelter shook. I held the flashlight against my chest. Then, sometime during the night, I heard something. A distant sound. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it again. An engine. I stood too quickly and nearly fell. I moved toward the opening. "Help!" The sound disappeared. I shouted again. Help nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it had been the wind. I sank back down. Then I heard it. A vehicle. This time, unmistakably. It was getting closer. I forced myself outside. The storm was still raging, but far in the distance, a faint light moved between the trees. Headlights. I waved my flashlight. I screamed until my throat hurt. The vehicle slowed. Another light appeared behind it, then another. Rescue vehicles. I collapsed to my knees. Tears ran down my face, not because I was afraid anymore, because someone had come. Someone had looked for me. Someone had decided that my life mattered. A figure in a heavy rescue jacket ran toward me. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I tried to answer. My lips barely moved. "Yes." The man knelt beside me. "What's your name?" "Katherine Evans." "Where's your family?" I looked toward the darkness. My son. Where is he? I swallowed. He left me. The rescuer looked at me. "Left you where on the road?" His expression changed. "We've been searching for you for hours." I closed my eyes. Then I heard another voice. Calm. Firm. A voice that would become very important to me. "Get her warm, and get her into the vehicle." I opened my eyes. Sheriff Robert Mitchell was standing a few feet away. He looked at me carefully. Then he looked toward the direction of the road. "Mrs. Evans," he said, "we're going to get you out of here." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the worst was over. But as the rescuers wrapped me in blankets and carried me toward the vehicle, I didn't yet know that Sheriff Mitchell had already begun noticing things that didn't fit. And soon he would ask my son questions that Michael would not be able to answer. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I heard was the steady beep of a monitor. For several seconds, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me was white. A warm blanket covered my body. There was a faint smell of disinfectant in the air. Then I remembered the snow, the road, the trees. Michael. My heart began racing. A woman in blue scrubs noticed me moving. Mrs. Evans." I turned my head. She smiled gently. "You're awake." "Where am I?" "You're at the county hospital." I tried to sit up, but she placed a hand against my shoulder. Slowly. "How long you've been here? Several hours." I looked around. "What time is it?" "Just after 10 in the morning." Morning. That meant I had survived the night. A strange mixture of relief and sadness moved through me. I closed my eyes. The nurse checked my temperature and blood pressure. "My name is Linda Mitchell," she said. "I'm one of the nurses here." Mitchell. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered the man in the rescue vehicle. The sheriff, my husband. I stared at her. "He found me." "Yes." She smiled. "He was very worried about you." I swallowed. "Where is he?" "He's talking to the rescue team." I looked down at my hands. They were wrapped in gauze. "How bad?" "You were lucky." I almost laughed. Lucky. That word felt strange. I had been abandoned in a blizzard by my own son. But I was alive. Maybe that was what she meant. "You have mild frostbite and severe exposure," Linda explained. "But you're going to recover." I nodded. Then the question I had been avoiding returned. "Has Michael been found?" Linda paused. "I believe he's here." My heart sank. Here he came to the hospital. I looked toward the door. "Can I see him?" Linda hesitated. "Sheriff Mitchell wants to speak with you first. Why, he has some questions." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "About Michael." She didn't answer directly. "He'll explain." A few minutes later, Sheriff Robert Mitchell entered the room. He removed his hat and held it against his chest. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and tired eyes. I didn't look angry. That somehow made me more nervous. "Mrs. Evans, Sheriff, how are you feeling? Cold?" He smiled faintly. "That's understandable." He pulled a chair beside the bed. "I want you to know you're not in trouble." "I know." "I need to understand exactly what happened." I took a breath. Then I told him everything. I told him about Michael asking me to come to the cabin. I told him about the storm. I told him the SUV getting stuck. I told him Michael leaving. I told him my emergency coat was locked inside. I told him about the bag, the missing radio, the phone, the footprints, the flashlight, the emergency blanket. Sheriff Mitchell listened without interrupting. Occasionally, he wrote something in a small notebook. When I finished, he looked at me. Did Michael say he was going to get help? Yes. Did he tell you where he was going? He said there was a cabin. Did he tell you how long he would be gone? No. Did he tell you to stay inside the vehicle? Yes. And did he leave you with your emergency supplies? I shook my head. No. Why not? I don't know. That was the truth. I didn't know. Sheriff Mitchell leaned back. Mrs. Evans, I need to ask something difficult. I looked at him. Did your son intentionally leave you? The question hurt. I stared at the blanket covering my legs. I don't know. You're allowed to say that. I want to believe he didn't. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. But what does your heart tell you? My eyes filled with tears. My heart is, he wouldn't do this. And your memory? I looked at him. My memory says he did. He didn't write anything for several seconds. Then, he said quietly, that's important. I turned toward the window. Snow covered everything outside. I don't understand him anymore. Sheriff Mitchell's expression softened. You may not have to understand him today. He stood. Get some rest. Sheriff? He stopped. Is he here? Yes. Can I see him? I'd like to speak with him first. Why? Because I need to hear his version. I nodded. Please don't assume the worst. Sheriff Mitchell looked at me. I don't assume anything, Mrs. Evans. Then he left. I was alone for perhaps 10 minutes. Then I heard footsteps outside. The door opened. Michael walked in. For a second, I didn't recognize him. He looked exhausted. His hair was wet from melted snow. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. Mom. I stared at him. He walked toward the bed. I've been so worried. I couldn't speak. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. He stopped. Mom. I'm sorry. For what? His eyes filled with tears. I lost track of you. No. He looked at me. You left me. I didn't. You drove away. I thought you were going to the cabin. You didn't come back. I got lost. I stared at him. You got lost? Yes. Then why didn't you call for help? My phone died. I looked at him. My phone almost died too. He swallowed. I was trying to get help. Where I don't know. Michael. I was scared. So was I. His face tightened. I didn't mean for this to happen. I believed he was sorry, but I couldn't tell what he was sorry for. The storm, the danger, or being caught. He sat in the chair beside me. I love you, Mom. Those words used to make everything better. This time, they didn't. I love you too. He looked relieved. Then he said, you have to understand. Everything happened so quickly. I watched him carefully. Tell me what happened. He looked toward the door, then back at me. You got upset. I did. You said you were going to walk toward the cabin. No. I tried to stop you. No, Michael. You opened the door. I didn't. He looked confused. You don't remember, I stared at him. I remember everything. The room became silent. Michael looked away. You were confused. I wasn't. You were freezing. I was. You weren't thinking clearly. I was thinking clearly enough to know my son left me. His jaw tightened. Mom, I didn't abandon you. I felt something break inside me. Not because I believed him, because I finally understood that he was willing to look directly into my eyes and deny what I knew had happened. Sheriff Mitchell entered the room. Michael immediately stood. Sheriff. Michael. They looked at each other. Sheriff Mitchell walked to the foot of my bed. Can I ask you a few questions? Of course. Tell me what happened. Michael repeated the same story. He said, I became frightened. He said I left the vehicle. He said he tried to find me. He said he couldn't call because his phone had died. Sheriff Mitchell listened. Where did you leave the vehicle? On the mountain road. Where exactly? Michael gave an answer. Sheriff Mitchell wrote it down. How far did you walk? I don't know. Did you take any emergency supplies? No. Why not? I was in a hurry. Did your mother have her emergency coat? Michael paused. She should have. Sheriff Mitchell looked at him. Did she? I don't know. I asked whether she had it. Michael swallowed. I think she did. Sheriff Mitchell said nothing. He simply closed his notebook. Thank you. Michael looked relieved. But I noticed something. Sheriff Mitchell wasn't satisfied. Not even close. He turned toward me. Mrs. Evans, we'll talk again. After he left, Michael stood beside my bed. I didn't mean to hurt you. I looked at him. Then tell the truth. His face went pale. What? Tell him what really happened. He stared at me. For a moment, I thought he might finally confess. Instead, he whispered, You don't understand. Then he walked out. I watched the door close behind him. A few minutes later, Sheriff Mitchell returned. He didn't sit down this time. He stood beside the door. Mrs. Evans. Yes, I need you to answer one more question. What did your son know how dangerous the weather was? Yes. Are you certain how was checking the forecast before we left? Sheriff Mitchell nodded slowly. Thank you. He walked away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Because somewhere in that hospital, Sheriff Robert Mitchell was beginning to compare Michael's story with the evidence his deputies had already collected. And before the day was over, he would discover something inside Michael's SUV that would make his entire explanation begin to fall apart. By that afternoon, I was sitting upright in my hospital bed when Sheriff Robert Mitchell returned. This time, he wasn't alone. A deputy stood behind him holding a clear evidence bag. I noticed it immediately. Something was inside. Sheriff Mitchell closed the door behind him and walked toward me. How are you feeling, Mrs. Evans? Better? Good. He pulled the chair closer. I need to go over a few things with you. I nodded. Does this have something to do with Michael? Yes. My stomach tightened. What did you find? Sheriff Mitchell glanced at the deputy. Then he looked back at me. We recovered the SUV. We're about 3 miles from where you were found. Was Michael there? No. The answer came quickly. I lowered my eyes. He left it. He did. Why? That is what we're trying to determine. The deputy placed the evidence bag on the table beside me. Inside was a thick winter coat. My winter coat. The one James had bought me years earlier. I stared at it. That's mine. I know. Sheriff Mitchell looked at the bag. It was inside the SUV. My throat tightened. I told you. Yes. He paused. And now we have confirmation. I looked at him. What does that mean? It means your son was telling us something that doesn't match the physical evidence. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because someone finally believed me. Sadness because the evidence was proving what I had desperately hoped wasn't true. Sheriff Mitchell continued. There are several things we need to clarify. I nodded. First, you told me Michael instructed you to remain inside the SUV. Yes. Did he ever tell you that he was leaving permanently? No. Did he tell you that he was going to return? Yes. Did he take the keys? Yes. Did he take your emergency bag? I believe so. We found the bag. I looked at him. Where? On the rear floor. My heart sank. What was missing? Sheriff Mitchell opened another evidence bag. The radio. I stared at it. The radio was in the bag when I packed it. I know. Then where is it? We haven't found it. He paused. Neither have we found the battery pack you said you brought. I shook my head. I knew it. What he took them. Sheriff Mitchell didn't immediately agree. Instead, he asked, why would he? I don't know. That answer felt unbearable. I knew Michael had done something wrong. I knew he had left me, but I still couldn't understand why he would remove the things that could have helped me survive. Sheriff Mitchell leaned forward. Mrs. Evans, there's another issue. What the vehicle's GPS? My heart began beating faster. Michael said he was trying to reach the cabin. He did. So, the GPS tells a different story. I stared at him. Sheriff Mitchell pulled a small notebook from his pocket. According to the vehicle data, after leaving you, Michael didn't drive toward the cabin. I felt cold despite the warm room. Where did he go? He drove in the opposite direction. I closed my eyes. Are you sure? Yes. How far? Approximately 11 miles. I opened my eyes. 11, yes. Then why would he say he was trying to find me? Sheriff Mitchell didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. The silence said enough. I looked toward the window. Snow was still falling. For a moment, I thought about that night. Michael's face, his voice. I'm doing what I have to do. I had heard those words without understanding them. Now they sounded different. Sheriff Mitchell stood. I need to speak with Michael again. Will you arrest him? Not yet. Why not? Because I want to know why he left. I nodded. That matters. It matters very much. He walked toward the door, then stopped. Mrs. Evans? Yes, there's something else you should know. I waited. The first call reporting you missing was made much later than we expected. What does that mean? If Michael believed you had wandered away in a blizzard, he should have called immediately. I felt a heaviness in my chest. When did he call? Almost 2 hours later. I stared at him. 2 hours. He had left me alone for 2 hours before reporting me missing. I suddenly remembered sitting beneath those trees, shivering, trying to stay awake, waiting for him, waiting for help. And he had waited too. I pressed my fingers against my lips. Why? That is what we're trying to find out. Sheriff Mitchell left. I sat alone for several minutes. Then Linda came in to check my IV. She saw my face. What happened? I told her. She listened quietly. When I finished, she squeezed my shoulder. I'm sorry. So am I. You don't have to defend him. I looked at her. I know. But you also don't have to stop loving him. Tears filled my eyes. That may be the hardest part. Linda nodded. Sometimes love survives even when trust doesn't. Those words stayed with me. Later that evening, Michael returned. This time, his face looked different. He was angry. "Why is the sheriff questioning me again?" I looked at him. "I don't know. You told him things. I told him what happened. You're making this worse." "For whom?" He didn't answer. He walked toward the window. "They found the SUV. "Yes. They're acting like I did something wrong. You left me. I told you why." "No." He turned. "I was trying to get help. Then why didn't you call immediately?" "My phone died. Why didn't you use the radio?" He froze. "What radio?" "The radio in my emergency bag. I didn't know there was one." "You knew." "No, I didn't." I stared at him. "Michael, I packed that bag myself." He rubbed his forehead. "Mom, you're confused." That word again. Confused. I suddenly understood something. He wasn't simply defending himself. He was trying to make me doubt myself. "I know what happened," I said. "You were freezing." "I know. You were scared." "Yes. You may remember things incorrectly." I looked directly into his eyes. "I remember you leaving." He said nothing. Then the door opened. Sheriff Mitchell stepped inside. Michael turned around. "Sheriff." "Michael." Sheriff Mitchell held a folder. "I need to ask you a few questions." Michael sighed. "I've already answered them." "I know. Then why am I still being questioned because your answers keep changing?" Michael's face hardened. "They don't." Sheriff Mitchell opened the folder. "You told me you left the SUV to find the cabin." "Yes." "You told me you walked west." "Yes." "You told me your phone died." "Yes." Sheriff Mitchell looked at him. "The vehicle GPS shows you drove east." Michael stared at him. "I was confused. You also said you called for help immediately." "I did. Your phone records show otherwise." Michael's expression changed. Sheriff Mitchell continued. "You said you didn't know your mother had an emergency coat." "I didn't." "Then why did you tell the deputy yesterday that she probably had it?" Michael didn't answer. Sheriff Mitchell closed the folder. Then he looked at him. "Let's make this simpler." Michael remained silent. Sheriff Mitchell pointed toward the evidence bag containing my coat. "Your mother was found in a blizzard without this coat." Michael swallowed. "I didn't know she left without it." Sheriff Mitchell stepped closer. "Then explain something to me." The room became completely silent. Sheriff Mitchell's voice was calm, almost gentle. "If your mother left the vehicle on her own, why was her emergency coat still locked inside your SUV?" Michael stared at him. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Sheriff Mitchell waited. Michael looked at me, then back at the sheriff. He stopped. "I don't know." Sheriff Mitchell didn't move. "You don't know?" Michael shook his head. I was panicking. "That's not an answer. I told you I don't remember. You remembered enough yesterday." Michael's face reddened. Sheriff Mitchell remained calm. "You said your mother walked away." "Yes." "Then why would she leave without the coat she knew she needed?" "I don't know." "And why would you lock it inside the vehicle?" "I didn't lock it. The vehicle was locked. I don't know how." Sheriff Mitchell looked at me briefly, then back at Michael. "That is the problem." Michael lowered his eyes. I watched him. For the first time since the storm began, I saw fear on my son's face. Not fear for me, fear for himself. And in that moment, I knew something important had changed. Sheriff Mitchell no longer had only my story. He had evidence, the GPS, the phone records, the missing emergency equipment, the coat, and now Michael's own contradictions. Sheriff Mitchell gathered his folder. "We'll talk again tomorrow." Michael didn't respond. The sheriff walked out. Michael remained standing beside my bed. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Mom, please." I looked at him. "What don't turn against me?" The words broke my heart, because I realized he still didn't understand. I hadn't turned against him. I had turned against the truth, and the truth was no longer willing to stay buried. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. For the first time since the blizzard, I didn't immediately think about the cold. I thought about Michael. His face from the night before kept returning to me. "Mom, please, don't turn against me." I had replayed those words for hours. There was something almost childlike about them. For one brief moment, I could see the frightened little boy he used to be. But then I remembered the locked emergency coat, the missing radio, the delayed call, the GPS records, and the 11 miles he had driven in the opposite direction. Love was telling me to protect my son. Truth was telling me to stop protecting him from the consequences of his choices. Around 8 that morning, Sheriff Robert Mitchell returned. He carried a cup of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other. "Morning, Mrs. Evans." "Morning." He placed the coffee on my bedside table. "Thought you might want this." "Thank you." He sat down. "I need to tell you something before I ask more questions." I looked at him. "We found Michael. You found him. He came to the sheriff's office himself." My heart tightened. "Why?" He said he wanted to explain. Did he not completely? I lowered my eyes. Sheriff Mitchell opened the folder. "His story has changed again." I wasn't surprised. "What does he say now?" "He claims he left you because he believed you were going to walk toward the cabin." "That isn't true." "I know." He looked at me carefully. "But there's more. What he says you had been talking about selling the house." I stared at him. "I never said that. He claims you were considering it." "No." "He also says you were upset about his financial problems." I shook my head. I knew he had problems, but I never argued with him about money. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. "I believe you." That sentence brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you." He closed the folder. "There's something else." What we searched the SUV more thoroughly. My stomach tightened. "What did you find?" "Your emergency bag wasn't the only thing missing." I waited. "There was a folder in the vehicle." "What kind of folder? Property documents?" I stared at him. "Property documents?" "Yes." "What documents? Copies of the deed to your house?" My heart stopped. "I didn't put those there. I know." "Michael did." Sheriff Mitchell didn't answer. He didn't need to. I leaned back against the pillow. Suddenly, every strange question Michael had asked over the past few months made sense. The deed, the will, the appraisal, the property taxes, the questions about ownership, the folder of homes he wanted me to consider. This wasn't about my safety. It had never been. He had wanted access to my property. But why, Sheriff? I whispered, "What is happening?" He looked at me. "Your son is in serious financial trouble." "How serious? Serious enough that his business is facing foreclosure." I closed my eyes. I remembered the phone calls, the lender, the folder, his fear. He wanted my house. Sheriff Mitchell nodded slowly. We believe so. My chest hurt. But why would he leave me in a blizzard? That is the part we are still investigating. I looked at him. Do you think he intended to kill me? Sheriff Mitchell was silent for a long moment. Then he said carefully, I don't want to make a conclusion before we have all the evidence. That answer frightened me more than a simple yes would have. I stared at the blanket. He's my son. I know. He wasn't always like this. I believe you. He used to be a good boy. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. People can make terrible choices without being terrible their entire lives. That sentence stayed with me. I wanted to believe it. Because if Michael had become completely evil, then I would have to accept that the son I loved was gone. But if he had simply made terrible choices, perhaps there was still a part of him worth saving. Later that morning, Linda brought me breakfast. I barely touched it. Your husband is worried about you, she said. The sheriff. She smiled. He doesn't usually get personally involved. Why is he? He found you. I looked at her. What does that mean? He said you reminded him of his mother. I smiled faintly. That sounds like something a sheriff would never admit. Linda laughed. He didn't say it directly. For the first time in days, I laughed too. It felt strange, almost foreign, but good. Then the door opened. Michael stood there. He looked exhausted. He didn't have the anger from yesterday. He looked smaller somehow. Can I talk to Mom alone? Linda looked at me. I nodded. She left. Michael sat beside the bed. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, I'm sorry. I looked at him. For what? For everything. That's a start. He looked down at his hands. I was scared. I know. My business was failing. I know. I thought I could fix it. With my house. He closed his eyes. Yes. The word barely came out. I felt something inside me crack. How long? He swallowed. Months. Months. I thought I'd sell the property after you moved. I stared at him. You planned it. I didn't plan to hurt you. But you planned to take my home. I thought you'd agree. You knew I wouldn't. He didn't answer. You knew. Yes. Tears filled his eyes. I was desperate. Desperation doesn't make betrayal acceptable. I know. You could have asked me for help. I was ashamed. I shook my head. You weren't ashamed enough to use me. He looked at me. I never wanted you to die. The room went silent. I stared at him. Then why did you leave me? I thought you would be found. By whom, I don't know. You left me in a blizzard. I panicked. You locked my coat inside. I didn't think. You took the emergency radio. I didn't want you calling anyone. The words came out before he realized what he had admitted. His face changed. I stared at him. He froze. I whispered, What did you say? He looked away. I didn't mean you didn't want me calling anyone. He covered his face with his hands. I was trying to buy time. For what? He didn't answer. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. What were you planning to do? I was going to arrange the sale. While I was missing, no. Then, when he looked at me, after, my eyes filled with tears. After I was dead, his face crumpled. No. The word exploded from him. I never planned that, but you knew I might die. He couldn't answer. That silence was the answer. I turned my face toward the window. I couldn't look at him. Michael began crying. I am sorry. I closed my eyes. I believe you're sorry. He looked up. But that doesn't erase what you did. He nodded. I know. The door opened. Sheriff Mitchell stood there. He had heard enough. Michael, he said quietly, I need you to come with me. Michael stood. Am I under arrest? Not at this moment. Michael looked at me. Mom. I couldn't answer. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around. I really am sorry. I finally looked at him. I know. Then he left with the sheriff. I thought that would be the hardest moment of my life. I was wrong, because an hour later, Sheriff Mitchell returned with news that changed everything. He placed a document on my bedside table. It was a copy of the deed, but it wasn't the only document. There was another page attached to it, a page bearing a signature. My signature. I stared at it in disbelief. I never signed this. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. I know. Then whose signature is that we're investigating? I touched the paper with trembling fingers. The signature looked like mine, almost perfect. But there was one problem, one tiny detail Michael had overlooked. The date. I looked at Sheriff Mitchell. This says I signed it last month. Yes, I was in the hospital that week. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. We checked. My heart began pounding. And I know who witnessed it, who I looked at him. Michael's business partner. Sheriff Mitchell's expression hardened. That was the moment we both understood. The blizzard hadn't been the beginning. It had been the final step in a plan that had started months earlier. And somewhere inside Michael's business records was the proof that could finally expose exactly what he had been trying to do to me. The document stayed on my bedside table for a long time after Sheriff Mitchell left. I couldn't stop looking at it. My name was printed beneath a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Katherine Evans. The date was clearly visible. October 14th. I remembered that day. I had been at the county hospital for a medical appointment that morning. I had spent most of the afternoon at home because my knee had been bothering me. I had not signed anything. I had not met a notary. I had not spoken with Michael. And yet, there it was. A document claiming I had authorized the transfer of my property. My home. The place James and I had built together. The place where I had raised Michael. Someone had tried to steal it using my own name. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. Sheriff Robert Mitchell, who had been standing near the window, turned around. Yes, how could they make my signature look so real? That is what we're trying to establish. Can they do that? With enough access to your old document, signatures can be copied. I stared at the paper. Michael had access to my house. Did he ever handle your paperwork? Yes. How often? More than I realized. Sheriff Mitchell pulled out his notebook. Think carefully. I closed my eyes. I began remembering. After James died, Michael had helped me organize several boxes of financial documents. He had helped me scan old insurance papers. He had helped me change passwords on some accounts. He had even offered to store digital copies of important documents on his computer. At the time, I had been grateful. I had trusted him. Now every memory felt different. He had copies of my documents, I said. Sheriff Mitchell nodded. That could explain access. But not the witness. Correct. You said Michael's business partner witnessed the document. That's what the paperwork indicates. His name? Daniel Harper. The name meant nothing to me. I had heard Michael mention Daniel before, but I had never met him. What happens now? We verify everything. How? We'll compare the signature with authenticated documents. We'll speak with the notary. We'll examine the records from the day you supposedly signed. And if they prove it was forged, then this becomes much more serious. I looked down at my hands. I don't want Michael to go to prison. Sheriff Mitchell's expression softened. I understand. He's still my son. I know, but I don't want him to get away with this either. That distinction matters. I nodded. For the first time, I realized that justice did not necessarily mean revenge. I didn't want Michael destroyed. I wanted the truth. I wanted my home protected. And most of all, I wanted to know how far he had gone. Later that afternoon, I was discharged from the hospital. Sheriff Mitchell insisted that I stay somewhere safe until the investigation was complete. I didn't want to leave my house, but I also knew I couldn't return there alone. So I agreed to stay temporarily with Linda and Robert. Their home was warm and modest, with framed family photographs covering the hallway walls. It felt strange. Robert built a fire. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, and listened to them talk quietly in the kitchen. It was the first peaceful evening I had experienced in weeks, but peace didn't last. At around 8 o'clock, Robert's phone rang. He answered. Mitchell. He listened. His expression changed. What time? Another pause. Send it to my office. He ended the call. I looked at him. What happened? The notary has been located. I sat straighter. And she remembers the appointment. My heart sank. She remembers me. No. I waited. She remembers a woman signing the document. I stared at him. A woman? Yes. Then it wasn't me. No. Who was it? We don't know yet. He sat across from me. But the notary made an important observation. What she said, the woman had your identification. My mouth went dry. My driver's license. Yes. I felt sick. I keep my license in my purse. Where was your purse that day, I thought? Michael had it. Robert leaned forward. Why he was driving me to the pharmacy. What happened afterward, I didn't notice it was missing until the next morning. Robert exchanged a look with Linda. What we believe your identification may have been used to support the forged signature. I shook my head. How could they make a notary believe that woman was me? They may have used enough information to make the transaction appear legitimate. I felt tears rising. This is more than stealing my house. Yes, they tried to create a legal identity for someone who wasn't me. Robert nodded. That is why we're taking this seriously. I looked toward the fireplace. What about Michael? We haven't found him. My heart tightened. Where is he? He was released after questioning. Released? We don't have enough to hold him yet. I nodded slowly. Part of me was relieved. Another part was frightened. What if he runs? We're monitoring him. I looked at Robert. Do you think he'll come back? I don't know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman who had used my identification. Who was she? How had she gotten my license? Why had Daniel Harper been there? And why had Michael believed he could get away with it? Around 2 in the morning, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then I heard a sound downstairs. A door closing. I sat upright. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I heard footsteps. Slow. careful. I got out of bed. I opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. Robert? No answer. I walked toward the stairs. Then I heard Robert's voice from downstairs. Don't move. I froze. A second voice answered. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Michael. My heart stopped. I hurried downstairs. Robert was standing in the living room. Michael stood near the front door. His face looked exhausted. What are you doing here? I asked. He looked at me. I needed to talk to you. Robert stepped between us. You can talk here. Michael nodded. I know. He reached into his jacket. Robert immediately raised his hand, slowly. Michael pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the table. I found this. Robert picked it up. What is it? Michael looked at me. Something I should have given you a long time ago. Robert opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. My husband's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. My knees almost gave out. That's James's. Michael nodded. I found it in Dad's old office. I stared at him. What does it say? Michael looked at the floor. It explains why Dad never wanted the property sold. I felt confused. Why Michael swallowed? Because the land wasn't just worth what the market said. Robert looked at him. What do you mean? Michael took a breath. There was something beneath it. I stared at him. What? He shook his head. I don't know exactly. Then why did you try to sell it? Because Daniel told me there was something valuable there. My heart began pounding. Robert stepped closer. Something valuable, mineral rights. The room became silent. Michael continued. Daniel had information that the county was reviewing geological surveys in the area. I remembered James talking about the land years earlier. He had always been protective of it. I had assumed it was sentimental. Maybe there had been another reason. Michael looked at me. I thought if I could get control of the property, I could sell the rights and save my company. You could have asked me. I was afraid you'd say no. I would have. He nodded. I know. Robert held up the letter. What does James say? Michael looked at me. He says the property should never be sold without careful review. I felt a strange sadness. James had known. Perhaps he had suspected something long before any of us. But then Robert opened the letter fully. His expression changed. What? He looked at me. Mrs. Evans, there's a name here. Who's Daniel Harper? I stared at him. My son's business partner. James had written about him years before Michael's business even existed. That made no sense. Why would my husband know Daniel? Michael's face went pale. I didn't know Dad knew him. Robert read the next lines silently. Then he looked up. Your husband suspected Daniel was trying to acquire property in this area through intermediaries. My stomach tightened. This started before Michael. Yes. I looked at my son. He seemed as shocked as I was. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes that had nothing to do with his own mistakes. Michael, I whispered. He looked at me. What? Who exactly have you been working with? He didn't answer. Robert's phone rang. He answered. His face became serious. Yes, he listened. Then he looked directly at Michael. Where is Daniel Harper right now? Michael's face drained of color. I don't know. Robert ended the call. Then he said quietly, We just found his vehicle abandoned near Katherine's property. My heart sank. Why would he? Robert looked toward the front door. That is what we're about to find out. And suddenly, the story I thought was about a son trying to save his failing business became something much darker. Because Michael may have betrayed me, but someone else had been watching my family for years. And now that person was coming back for the one thing James had spent his life protecting. I couldn't breathe. Daniel Harper's abandoned vehicle had been found near my property. My property. The house I had been trying to protect. The land James had loved. The same land Michael had been trying to control. And now, after everything that had happened, another man was somewhere nearby. I looked at Robert. Is my house safe? We don't know yet. What do you mean you don't know? We have deputies heading there now. I want to go. No. Sheriff, Katherine, you just survived a blizzard. I don't care. I do. His voice was firm, but not unkind. You are staying here. Michael was standing near the doorway. He looked as frightened as I felt. Daniel wouldn't hurt her, he said. Robert turned toward him. How well do you know him? Michael hesitated. Well, how well? He was my business partner. That wasn't my question. Michael lowered his eyes. Robert stepped closer. Did Daniel know about your mother's property? Yes. Did he know you were planning to sell it? Yes. Did he know about the financial problems Michael swallowed? Yes. Robert stared at him. And did he know you were taking your mother into the mountains? Michael didn't answer. That silence told us everything. Robert's expression hardened. Michael. Yes, he knew. Michael nodded. I felt a terrible sadness wash over me, so he knew I would be alone. Michael looked at me. I didn't tell him what I was going to do. But you told him you were taking me there. I told him we were going to the cabin. Why I needed him to believe the property deal was still happening. Robert immediately interrupted. What property deal? Michael rubbed his face. Daniel had a buyer. A buyer for what? The mineral rights. Robert glanced at me. Michael continued. He said there were companies interested in the land. He said if I could get control of it, we could sell the rights quickly. And you believed him? I had no reason not to. You had plenty of reasons. Michael looked at me. I know that now. I turned away. I couldn't bear looking at him. Robert asked, when did Daniel first approach you? About 8 months ago. Before you started pressuring your mother to sell, yes. Did he tell you about the geological surveys? Yes. Did he provide documents? Michael nodded. Reports? Maps? Old records? Where are they? I don't know. What do you mean Daniel kept most of them? Robert's eyes narrowed. Most. Michael looked nervous. I had copies. Where my office? Are they still there? I don't know. Robert reached for his phone. I'll have deputies check. I interrupted. What about James? Michael looked at me. What about him? Did Daniel know my husband? Michael shook his head. I don't think so. I remembered the letter. Daniel's name. James's handwriting. My husband had known him, or at least he had known of him. Robert seemed to read my thoughts. Katherine, can you show me the letter? I nodded. He picked it up again. There may be more here than we realized. He read several lines. Then he stopped. What? He turned the page over. There was writing on the back. I had never noticed it. The ink was faint. Robert held it beneath the lamp. My heart began pounding. What does it say? He read silently. Then he looked at me. Your husband wrote a date. What date? March 17, 2012. That was the year before James retired. Robert nodded. And there's another name. I leaned forward. Who's Thomas Harper? I stared at him. Harper Daniel's father, Michael, looked shocked. Daniel's father was Thomas Harper. Robert nodded. I felt dizzy. What does that mean? It means Daniel may have known about this property long before he met Michael. Michael sat down. That's impossible. Why? Because Daniel told me he learned about the mineral surveys through his company. Robert looked at him. Maybe he lied. Michael's face changed. I could see him remembering conversations, documents, promises, everything he had believed. He used me, Michael whispered. Robert didn't answer. Michael looked at me. I thought I was saving my business. I stared at him. You were willing to destroy my life to save yours. He began crying. I know. No, Michael. My voice trembled. You don't know. He looked up. I spent years believing that if I loved you enough, you would always be safe. He wiped his face. I failed you. You did. The honesty seemed to hurt him more than anger would have. Robert stepped in. This isn't the time for guilt. Michael nodded. Then what do I do? Tell us everything. Michael looked at me. Then he began. Daniel had approached him when his construction company started losing contracts. At first, he had offered financial advice. Then he mentioned the land. He said the property might contain valuable mineral deposits. He showed Michael maps. He told him companies would pay millions for access. But there was one problem. Michael didn't own the land. His mother did. Daniel suggested that Michael convince me to sell. When I refused, Daniel became impatient. He said I needed another way, Michael admitted. What way? Robert asked. Michael stared at the floor. He suggested a power of attorney. My stomach turned. He wanted you to make me sign one, yes. I would never. I knew that. So you forged my signature. Michael closed his eyes. Yes. Robert asked, who forged it? I don't know. You know? Michael shook his head. I swear I don't. Daniel. I never saw him forge anything. Then who? Michael hesitated. Someone Daniel introduced me to. Name I only knew her as Melissa. I stared at him. Melissa? Yes. What did she look like? Brown hair. Late 40s? Maybe early 50s? Robert's expression changed. Could you identify her? Yes. He immediately pulled out his phone. A few seconds later, he showed Michael a photograph. Michael stared at it. That's her. Robert lowered the phone. What is her name? We're still confirming it. I looked at him. Was she the woman who used my identification? We believe so. My hands began shaking. Robert continued. She may have been involved in several property fraud cases across the state. I looked at Michael. And you trusted her? I trusted Daniel. You trusted the wrong person. Michael nodded. I know. Then Robert's phone rang again. He answered. Yes. His expression became serious. Are you certain he listened? Understood. He ended the call. What happened? I asked. He looked at me. My deputies reached your property, and they found signs that someone had entered the house. My heart stopped. Did they find anyone? No. Then what did they find? Robert paused. The office had been searched. I immediately thought of James, the letter, the documents, the old records. What were they looking for? Your husband's files. I looked at Michael. He looked back at me. Then Robert said something that made my blood run cold. They also found a message written on your kitchen table. What message? Robert's eyes met mine. It said, "You should have sold when you had the chance." Nobody spoke. I felt as though the room had suddenly become much colder. Daniel wasn't interested only in money anymore. He was sending a message, and he knew exactly where I lived. Robert stood. "We're moving you to a secure location." I nodded. For once, I didn't argue. Michael stood too. "I'll help." Robert looked at him. "You're coming with us." Michael nodded. As we walked toward the door, I looked back at the small house where I had spent the night. I had thought the danger was behind me. I had thought surviving the blizzard was the hardest part. I was wrong. The blizzard had only exposed the betrayal. Now we had to uncover the truth behind the property. And somewhere in the middle of that truth was a secret James had carried for years. A secret Daniel Harper desperately wanted to keep buried. Because according to the old records, the mineral rights were not the only valuable thing beneath my land. There was something else. Something James had discovered before he died. And if the note in his handwriting was telling the truth, my husband had hidden the evidence somewhere inside our home. The next morning, Sheriff Robert Mitchell drove me back toward my house. I had barely slept. All night, I kept thinking about the message written on my kitchen table. "You should have sold when you had the chance." Those words had been meant for me, but somehow they felt like a warning from someone who believed my house belonged to them. Michael sat in the back seat of the sheriff's vehicle. He had barely spoken since the night before. I kept looking at him through the rearview mirror. My son looked defeated. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. For the first time, I wondered whether he finally understood how close he had come to losing everything. The road to my house was still covered with patches of snow. Trees stood heavy beneath white branches. Everything looked peaceful. That almost made it worse. How could something so beautiful hide so much ugliness? When we arrived, 2 deputies were waiting outside. Yellow tape had been placed across the front entrance. My heart tightened. "That was my home," I whispered. Robert looked at me. "It still is." I stepped out of the vehicle. The cold air touched my face. For a moment, I simply stood there. Then I walked toward the porch. Every step brought back a memory. James carrying groceries through that door. Michael running inside as a child. Christmas mornings. Birthday dinners. Quiet evenings beside the fireplace. And now the same house was a crime scene. Robert opened the door. "Stay close." I nodded. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Almost. The living room was untouched. The kitchen was mostly the same. But when I reached the hallway, I saw the first sign of what had happened. The framed photograph of James and me was lying on the floor. The glass was cracked. I bent down instinctively. Robert stopped me. "Don't touch it." I stepped back. Someone had searched the house, not carelessly, methodically. Drawers had been opened. Cabinet doors were hanging wide. Boxes had been moved. The office was the worst. Files were scattered across the floor. The old wooden desk James had used for 30 years had been opened. The drawers had been emptied. I stood in the doorway. "They were looking for something." Robert nodded. "Yes." "What?" "That's what we're trying to determine." I walked slowly into the room. My eyes moved across the shelves. James had kept everything. Tax records, business documents, old maps, receipts, letters, photographs. He never threw anything away. I remembered him joking that one day our house would collapse under the weight of his paperwork. I smiled faintly. Then I noticed something. One shelf looked different. I stepped closer. Robert, he came beside me. What I pointed. There used to be 3 blue binders there. He looked at the empty space. What's in them, I don't know. You don't know? James handled most of that material. I thought harder. Wait. I touched the shelf. He called them the mountain files. Robert immediately looked at me. Mountain files? Yes. What did they contain? Surveys, maps, old property records. I never paid much attention. Where would they be now? I shook my head. They're gone. Robert's jaw tightened. One of the deputies entered. Sheriff, we found something. He handed Robert a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was an old key. I recognized it immediately. That belongs to the basement. Robert looked at me. Does anyone else have a key, Michael? We both turned toward the doorway. Michael stood there. His face had gone pale. I didn't take it. Robert walked toward him. I didn't ask whether you did. Michael looked at the key. I haven't been in the basement in months. I watched him carefully. Why would someone take that key? Michael swallowed. I don't know. Robert nodded toward the basement door. Let's find out. We went downstairs. The basement smelled of dust wood and old cardboard. James had used half of it for storage. The other half had been his workshop. I hadn't spent much time down there since his death. Robert's flashlight moved across the walls. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Michael stopped. Wait. He pointed toward the far corner. There. A wooden panel was slightly open. I frowned. That wasn't like that before. Robert approached carefully. He pulled the panel away. Behind it was a narrow compartment built into the wall. I stared. I've never seen that. Michael looked shocked. Dad built that I didn't know. Inside the compartment were several old folders and a small metal box. Robert carefully removed them. He opened the first folder. Maps. The second contained geological reports. The third contained correspondence. Then he opened the metal box. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. I recognized James's handwriting immediately. Robert unfolded the paper. His eyes moved across the page. What does it say? I asked. He handed it to me. My hands trembled. The note was short. Katherine, if you are reading this, something has gone wrong. Do not sell this property without speaking to the county land office. The reports Daniel showed people are incomplete. The real value is not what he claims. Keep the original survey safe. I stared at the page. Daniel. Robert nodded. Michael looked sick. Dad knew. He knew something was wrong, Robert said. Michael stepped closer. Can I see it? I handed him the note. He read it twice. Then he sat on an old wooden crate. He knew about Daniel. Yes, I said. But why didn't he tell me I looked at him? Maybe he didn't trust Daniel. Michael looked down. Maybe he shouldn't have trusted me either. I didn't answer. Robert picked up the flash drive. Do you know what's on this? No. Then we'll have it examined. He turned toward the deputy. Secure it. The deputy carefully placed it into an evidence bag. Michael suddenly stood. Sheriff. What? There was another thing. Robert looked at him. What Daniel once told me my father had been working with someone at the county. I frowned. Who? I don't know the name. Robert's expression became serious. Did he say why he said Dad had discovered that someone was manipulating property records? My heart began pounding. Property records. Michael nodded. He said some landowners were being pressured to sell. Robert looked at me. This could be bigger than your property. I felt a chill. What do you mean? If someone has been manipulating records or pressuring landowners, there may be other victims. Michael stared at the floor. Daniel said my father got too close. The room became silent. I suddenly remembered something James had said near the end of his life. At the time, I had thought he was simply tired. He had looked at me one evening and said, "If anyone ever tells you this land is worthless, don't believe them." I had laughed. "James, we're not sitting on a gold mine." He had smiled. "Maybe we are." I had forgotten that conversation. Until now. Robert looked at me. Did James ever mention being threatened? I hesitated. Once, when, a few months before he died. Michael looked up. What happened? Someone had followed him home. Michael's face changed. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father told me not to worry. Robert's expression hardened. Did you report it? No. Why, James said he handled it. Robert sighed. People often say that when they don't want their families frightened. I looked around the basement, the old workshop, the tools, the boxes, the memories. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Michael's debt. It wasn't even just about my house. James had apparently stumbled into something dangerous years ago. And now, whatever he had discovered had resurfaced. A deputy came downstairs. Sheriff. Robert turned. We found another item in the office. What? The deputy held up a sealed envelope. Katherine Evans. My name was written across the front. My hands went cold. That's James's handwriting. Robert looked at the envelope. Do you want to open it? I nodded. He handed it to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed James standing beside a group of men outside a county building. I recognized two of them. One was James. The other was Daniel's father, Thomas Harper. But there was a third man. I didn't recognize him. Robert took the photograph. Do you know this person? I stared at the man's face. Something about him felt familiar. Then I remembered. I had seen him years ago, at James's funeral. He had stood near the back of the church and left before the service ended. I've seen him before. Where at my husband's funeral. Robert turned the photograph over. There was a date written on the back. March 17th, 2012. The same date James had written in the letter. Robert looked at me. This wasn't coincidence. What happened that day, I don't know. Michael stared at the photograph. Then his eyes widened. I know him. Robert immediately turned. Who is he? Michael swallowed. His name is Richard Cole. Who is Richard Cole? Michael looked at me. He was Daniel's attorney. My stomach dropped. Robert's expression hardened. Was Michael nodded? He died 2 years ago. Robert looked at the photograph again. Then why did he appear at your father's funeral? Michael froze. I stared at him. Nobody spoke, because there was only one possible explanation. Either Michael was wrong about the man's identity, or the person in that photograph was someone who had been pretending to be dead. And if Richard Cole was still alive, then someone had been hiding the truth for years. The storm had exposed Michael's betrayal. But now, buried beneath the paperwork, the property, and James's old secrets, we were uncovering something far more dangerous. And I was beginning to understand why my husband had never wanted me to know. For several seconds, nobody moved. The photograph remained in Robert Mitchell's hand. James stood in the center of it, younger and healthier, with one hand resting on a folder. Beside him was Thomas Harper, and standing a few feet away was the man Michael had identified as Richard Cole, a man who was supposedly dead. I looked at my son. "You're certain?" Michael nodded slowly. "I met him several times. Where Daniel's office. When? Over the past year." My heart sank. "So, Richard Cole isn't dead?" "I don't know." "You just said you knew him." "I knew the man Daniel called Richard Cole." Robert's eyes narrowed. What did he look like? Michael described him. Gray hair, tall, thin, a small scar beneath his left eye. Robert looked at the photograph again. "That's him." I felt dizzy. "Then why does Michael believe he's dead?" Michael shook his head. "Because Daniel told me he died. When 2 years ago. Did you see a death certificate number obituary num? Funeral." Michael looked uncomfortable. "No." Robert nodded. "Then you assumed." Michael didn't respond. I looked at the photograph again. "Why would Daniel tell you he was dead?" "I don't know." Robert carefully placed the photograph back into its evidence sleeve. "We need to find out." He turned to the deputy. "Run everything we have on Richard Cole." The deputy nodded and left. I sat down on an old wooden chair. My legs suddenly felt weak. There were too many pieces, too many names, too many years. I had spent most of my life believing my husband was a private man who disliked unnecessary trouble. Now I was discovering that he had been investigating something serious, something involving property, something involving the Harper family, and apparently someone who was supposed to be dead. Michael sat beside me. "Mom." I didn't look at him. "I should have told you." "Yes, I was scared. I know." "No, you don't." I finally looked at him. "I know what fear feels like now." His eyes filled with tears. "I thought if I could fix the company, everything would go back to normal. By taking my home. Yes. By forging my signature. Yes. By leaving me in a blizzard." He lowered his head. "Yes." The word hurt. But strangely, hearing him admit it was easier than hearing another lie. I said nothing. He continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me." "Good." He nodded. "I just want you to know that I never intended for you to die." I looked at him. "You keep saying that. Because it's true. Then why didn't you come back?" He closed his eyes. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of Daniel." I froze. Why, Michael looked at Robert, then at me. "Because after I left you, Daniel called me." Robert stepped closer. "About 20 minutes after I drove away." "What did he say?" "He asked if I had done it." My heart tightened. "Done what?" Michael swallowed. "Left you." The room became silent. Robert's expression hardened. "What did you tell him?" I said yes. "And then?" "He told me not to go back." Why, he said the storm would take care of the rest. I closed my eyes. The words felt like a knife. The storm would take care of the rest. Michael looked at me. I was terrified. "You should have been. I wanted to go back. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" "Because Daniel said he had people watching the road." Robert immediately asked, "Did he threaten you?" "Yes." "How?" "He said if I contacted the sheriff, he'd destroy my business and make sure I went to prison." Robert stared at him. "He threatened you with evidence." Michael nodded. "What evidence?" Michael looked at me. "Documents." "What documents?" "Financial records. Transfers. Things I signed." Robert understood immediately. He had enough information to implicate you. Yes. So you were trapped. Michael nodded. I felt anger rise again. You were trapped because you chose to work with him. Michael didn't argue. I know. Robert walked toward the basement wall. Did Daniel ever tell you why he wanted this property so badly? Michael shook his head. He said there was money underground. That's not enough. I know. Did he ever mention your father's research gnome? Did he know about the hidden files? I don't think so. Robert looked at me. Then we may have something Daniel doesn't know about. I remembered the flash drive. Sheriff. Yes, the drive. He turned. We haven't opened it. Can we not hear? Why, it's evidence. I nodded. Then take it. We will. The deputy returned. He looked serious. Sheriff, we found something. Robert turned. What we ran? Richard Cole through the state records. And there is no confirmed death record. Michael stood. What? No death certificate, no burial record, nothing. I stared at him. So he's alive. Legally, the deputy said, we can't establish that he's dead. Robert looked at Michael. Where did Daniel tell you Richard died at his office? When? About 6 months ago. Was Richard present? Numb. Did you ask questions I didn't care at the time? Robert nodded. That's understandable. Then the deputy handed him another paper. There's more. Robert read it. His expression changed. What the name Richard Cole appears in a property corporation registered last year. My heart began beating faster. What corporation? Mountain Crest Holdings. Michael went pale. I know that company. Robert looked at him. How Daniel used it. For what? Michael shook his head. I thought it was an investment company. The deputy continued. The registered agent is listed as Richard Cole. Nobody spoke. I looked at Michael. You said he was dead. I believed he was. Robert turned to the deputy. Where is the company registered? Denver. Office. An address downtown. Does it still operate? We're checking. Robert nodded. Do it. The deputy left. I leaned back against the wall. Everything felt unreal. Daniel, Richard, Thomas, James, my house, the forged deed, the blizzard. They were no longer separate events. They were pieces of one story. And someone had been arranging those pieces long before Michael understood what he was involved in. Then Michael suddenly spoke. There's something else. Robert turned. What I remember seeing Richard with a key. What key? Michael looked at me. A key to Mom's house. My heart stopped. What I saw it in Daniel's office. When? About 3 months ago. Why didn't you tell me I didn't know what it was? You knew it was a key. I didn't know it was yours. How did you know it looked like mine? Because it had a small brass tag. I remembered the brass tag. James had labeled every key in the house. Kitchen, garage, basement, office. I suddenly felt sick. Which room? Michael stared at me. The office. Robert immediately moved toward the stairs. Where are you going? To check something. We followed him upstairs. The office was still covered with evidence markers. Robert examined the desk, then the shelves. Finally, he stopped beside the old wooden cabinet. He looked at the lock. Does this open with the same key? I nodded. That cabinet belonged to James. Robert tried one of the keys recovered from the basement. It didn't work. Then he tried another. Click. The lock opened. Inside were several folders. One was labeled Land Survey Original. Robert pulled it out. My hands trembled. This is it, I whispered. He opened the folder. Inside was an original geological survey. The pages were old, but carefully preserved. Robert read through them. Then he stopped. Michael looked over his shoulder. Robert's face became serious. This isn't just about mineral rights. What is it? He turned a page. A map showed land surrounding my property. There was a large marked area beneath the eastern ridge. Robert traced it with his finger. This indicates a protected underground water source. I stared at him. Water? Yes. Michael looked confused. Why would that matter? Because if the survey is accurate, this aquifer supplies water to several properties downhill. I understood. The land isn't valuable because of minerals. Not primarily, Robert said. It controls access to the water. He nodded. Michael stared at the map. Daniel knew. Robert looked at him. Maybe. That's why he wanted the property. Probably. I felt a strange mixture of anger and relief. James had known. He had protected the land. I had hidden the original survey. And now I understood why. But then Robert noticed a second page. His expression changed. He held it up. This survey was updated when 2 years after the original, by whom Robert read the name, Richard Cole. The room went silent. Michael stepped backward. He was involved. Yes. Robert turned another page. At the bottom was a handwritten note. The handwriting wasn't James's. It said, "The Evans property must never change hands." I stared at those words. My husband hadn't been protecting the land because of sentiment. He had been protecting something that affected an entire community, and someone had spent years trying to gain control of it. Then Robert's phone rang. He answered. Mitchell. His expression changed. What address? He listened. Understood. He ended the call. What happened? I asked. He looked at Michael, then at me. We found Richard Cole. My heart stopped. Where Robert's voice was quiet. Inside Daniel Harper's abandoned office. I felt a wave of relief. Then Robert added, "He's alive." Michael closed his eyes, and for the first time, I realized the man behind all of this was no longer a shadow. He had a face, he had a name, and he was finally within reach. But Robert wasn't finished. He looked at me and said, Katherine, there's one more problem. What Richard Cole is asking to speak with you. I stared at Sheriff Robert Mitchell. Richard Cole wants to speak with me. Yes. Why he wouldn't say? I felt my stomach tighten. After everything I had learned, I wasn't sure I wanted to meet the man whose name had been buried inside my husband's files for more than a decade. But part of me needed answers. I needed to know why James had been investigating him. I needed to know why Daniel had lied about his death. And I needed to understand why my son had become trapped in a scheme that nearly cost me my life. Where is he? I asked. At the county detention center. Is he under arrest? Not officially for everything we're investigating. He's being held while we verify several matters. And he specifically asked for me. Yes. I took a slow breath. Then I'll speak to him. Robert looked concerned. Are you sure no? He gave me a faint smile. But I need to know. An hour later, Robert drove me to the county detention center. Michael stayed behind with a deputy. I didn't want him there. Not yet. This was something I needed to face myself. The detention center was a plain brick building with narrow windows and heavy doors. Robert walked beside me. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. I know. If he threatens you, we end the conversation. I understand. He nodded. Then we entered the interview room. Richard Cole was already sitting at the table. The moment I saw him, I recognized him. The photograph hadn't lied. Gray hair, thin face, small scar beneath his left eye. He looked older than he had in James's photograph, but it was unmistakably the same man. He looked at me for several seconds, then he stood. Katherine Evans. Hearing my name from his mouth made my skin crawl. How do you know me? I knew your husband. You knew James. Yes. How? Richard looked toward Robert. Do you want me to tell her everything? Robert's expression hardened. You asked for this meeting. Richard nodded. Then yes. He sat down again. I remained standing. You were at my husband's funeral. Yes. You were supposed to be dead. A faint smile appeared on his face. That's what Daniel believed. You told him you were dead, no? Then who did Daniel's father? Thomas Harper. I remembered the photograph. What happened to Thomas? Richard's expression became serious. He died believing he had won. What control? Control of my land. Control of the water. I sat down. Robert remained standing behind me. Richard continued. Your husband discovered an underground aquifer beneath your property in 2012. I know. No, Katherine. You know about the survey. You don't know what James discovered afterward. My heart began pounding. What Richard leaned forward. The aquifer extends farther than the county's public records indicate. Robert frowned. How far? Under several miles of privately owned land. And the county doesn't know. The county knows now. I stared at him. Then why did Daniel want my property? Because whoever controls the Evans property controls the easiest legal access point to the aquifer. I understood. They wanted to develop it. More than that. Richard's voice lowered. They wanted to sell access to a private water company. My stomach turned, to whom Richard shook his head. I won't give you a name until you understand the whole story. I looked at Robert. He nodded slightly. Continue. Richard took a breath. Thomas Harper discovered the aquifer first. I felt confused, but James's name was on the survey. James discovered it independently, so they were competing initially. Richard looked down. Then Thomas realized James had something he didn't. The original survey. Yes, and that's why he targeted James. Richard nodded. Your husband refused to sell. I thought of James's words. If anyone ever tells you this land is worthless, don't believe them. I felt tears sting my eyes. He knew. He knew exactly what was happening. What happened after that? Thomas began buying neighboring properties through shell companies. And James, he started documenting everything. That's why he kept those files. Yes. I looked at Richard. Then why were you involved? He looked ashamed. Because I was Thomas's attorney. My chest tightened. You helped him at first. Then what changed? Richard stared at the table. James confronted me. When 2012, the date on the photograph. Yes. What did he say? He told me he knew what Thomas was doing, and he asked me to stop. Did you? Richard nodded. I tried, but you stayed involved. Yes. Why money? The word was simple, ugly, honest. I told myself I was only handling paperwork. He looked at me. But paperwork can destroy lives. I didn't respond. Richard continued. James discovered that several property transfers had been manipulated. Forged, yes. Like mine, similar. My hands tightened around the edge of the table. How many people we don't know? 5 more. 10. Possibly dozens. I felt sick. All those families. Richard nodded. They were pressured to sell below market value, and if they refused, they were harassed, threatened. Yes. Like me. Yes. I looked down. For years, I had thought James was simply protective of our home. Now I understood. He wasn't protecting a house. He was protecting people. What happened to Thomas? Richard answered quietly. He died before the plan was completed. Then Daniel took over. Yes. Why? Because Daniel inherited his father's contacts. And you? I tried to disappear. That explains the fake death. Richard nodded. I needed Daniel to believe I was gone, but you still worked with him. I did not. Then why did he have your name? Because he used old corporate records. I stared at him. Daniel was pretending to operate through you. Yes. And the woman who forged my signature, Melissa Grant. Robert immediately looked at him. You know her, I do. Who is she? She was one of Thomas's assistants. I felt a chill. So this has been going on for years. Yes. Richard looked at me, and Daniel became desperate when his company began failing. He thought stealing my property would save him. He thought selling your property would give him enough leverage to restart the larger operation. I looked at him, and you let him. Richard's eyes filled with regret. I tried to stop him. How I contacted James's old associate. Who? Richard hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket. He removed a folded piece of paper. Robert stepped forward. Don't hand anything to her without letting me inspect it. Richard nodded. He gave the paper to Robert. Robert opened it. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at me. This is a list of what property owners. I leaned closer. Richard spoke quietly. People who were pressured to sell. I scanned the names. There were 27. 27 families. 27 stories I had never heard. At the bottom was one final name, Katherine Evans. My hands began shaking. Beside my name was a handwritten note. Final acquisition. I stared at it. Final. Richard nodded. Your property was the last piece. Why? Because the other properties surround the aquifer. Robert looked at him. And if they control Catherine's property, they can legally apply for extraction rights. My heart sank. All of this? Richard nodded. Yes. I looked at him. Then why did James die? The room went completely silent. Richard's face changed. Katherine, why did my husband die? I don't know. You knew him? Yes. You knew Thomas? Yes. You knew Daniel? Yes. What they were doing? Yes. Then tell me the truth. Richard closed his eyes. When James died, the official cause was a heart attack. I know. But James had been under enormous pressure. I shook my head. That isn't what I asked. Richard looked at me. I believe someone caused his death. My heart stopped. Robert stepped forward. Do you have evidence? Not enough. Who? Richard swallowed. Thomas was still alive then. I froze. Thomas Harper was alive when James died. Yes. But he died years ago. Later. Then why did you say he died before the plan was completed? Because I was speaking about the first phase. I stared at him. What happened to Thomas after James died? Richard looked toward the one-way mirror, then back at me. He disappeared, where we never found him. Robert's face hardened. Are you saying Thomas Harper may still be alive? Richard didn't answer. Instead, He said something that made the entire room go cold. "Your husband didn't die because of the property." I stared at him. Then why? Because James discovered who was secretly financing the entire operation. Who? Richard hesitated. Then he whispered, "Someone inside the county government." Robert immediately stepped forward. "Name." Richard looked at him. "I'll give you the name." He paused. "But you need to understand something first. What the person who financed it is still in office." Robert's expression changed. Who? Richard looked directly at me. Then he said the name. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was someone I had trusted. Someone who had attended James's funeral. Someone who had visited my house after his death. Someone who had spoken to me about my grief. Someone who had told me over and over that I needed to be careful with my property. And suddenly, every conversation I had ever had with that person took on a completely different meaning. Because the man I thought had been protecting me had been waiting for me to give up. And now that he knew I had survived the blizzard, he knew his final opportunity was disappearing. Robert stood perfectly still. Then he reached for his radio. "Get deputies to Catherine's property immediately." I looked at him. "Why?" He turned toward me. "Because if Richard is telling the truth, the person we're looking for already knows we're investigating. And somewhere outside that building, my greatest threat was no longer hiding. He was watching. The name Richard Cole had whispered seemed to follow me out of the interview room. I couldn't stop hearing it in my mind. County Commissioner William Hayes, the man who had attended James's funeral, the man who had brought casseroles to my house after my husband's death, the man who had told me more than once that I should consider selling the property because maintaining it alone would become too difficult. The man I had trusted. Now Sheriff Robert Mitchell was calling for deputies while Richard sat silently behind us. "Sheriff, I said what happens now. We protect you first." And William Hayes, "If Richard's information is accurate, we'll bring him in for questioning. Do you believe him?" Robert looked at me. "I believe the evidence needs to be followed." That was Robert's way of saying yes without saying it. We left the detention center immediately. Michael was waiting outside with a deputy. When he saw my face, he knew something had happened. "What did Richard say?" I looked at him. "He named someone." "Who?" "William Hayes." Michael's face changed. "The commissioner." "Yes." Michael stepped backward. "No. You know him?" "Of course." "Did Daniel know him?" Michael hesitated. "Yes. How well, I don't know." Robert interrupted. "You're going to tell us everything you remember." Michael nodded. As we drove toward my property, Michael explained that Daniel had mentioned Hayes several times. At first, Michael thought Hayes was simply a powerful local official who could help with permits. Later, Daniel began saying that Hayes understood the land. Michael had never questioned what that meant. He had been too focused on saving his company. Now he understood that every connection had been part of something larger. When we reached my property, several sheriff's vehicles were already there. The house was surrounded. Deputies were checking the woods and outbuildings. I stepped out of the vehicle. Robert immediately came toward me. "We found something." "What?" "A vehicle." "Whose?" He looked at me. "William Hayes." My heart sank. "He's here." His truck was found behind the barn. I stared toward the property. The barn stood beyond the house, surrounded by snow. "Is he inside?" "We don't know." Robert motioned to two deputies. They moved toward the barn. Michael followed them. I stayed beside Robert. A few minutes later, one of the deputies called out. Sheriff Robert moved quickly. I followed despite his warning. Inside the barn, the air was cold and smelled of oil and old wood. There were boxes stacked against the wall. One box had been opened. Inside were folders, property records, maps, copies of deeds, and photographs. 27 families. The same names Richard had shown us. Robert picked up one photograph. This is enough to establish a connection. I looked at the papers. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. A photograph of James. I was standing outside the county building. Behind him stood William Hayes. My husband had been photographed without knowing it. On the back was a handwritten note. He knows. I closed my eyes. James had known. He had known William was involved, and he had tried to protect me without frightening me. Then I heard footsteps behind us. We turned. William Hayes stood in the barn doorway. He was wearing a dark winter coat. His expression was strangely calm. Katherine, I stared at him. Why are you here? He looked at the sheriff. Robert, you don't understand. Then explain. Hayes looked at the papers. I came to retrieve my property. Your property, the documents. Robert stepped between us. You're not leaving. Hayes sighed. I expected this. Michael stepped forward. You used me. Hayes looked at him. I gave you an opportunity. You told me my mother was sitting on millions. You believed what you wanted to believe. You told me to get her signature. Hayes smiled faintly. I told you to solve your financial problems. Michael's face reddened. You knew I would hurt her. Hayes didn't answer. I stepped forward. You knew I was going to be left in that storm. His expression changed slightly. I knew Daniel had a plan. What plan? I don't know. You're lying. He looked at me. You have no idea how complicated this is. No. My voice shook. But I know one thing. He waited. You thought I was an old woman who could be pushed aside. His expression hardened. You don't understand the value of that land. I understand it better now. It could change this county. Then why did you need to steal it? He said nothing. Robert stepped closer. William Hayes, you're being detained pending investigation into property fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction. Hayes laughed softly. You think this ends with me? Robert's face remained calm. No. Hayes looked at Michael. You're forgetting someone. Michael went pale. Daniel. Hayes nodded. He knows where everything is. Robert immediately raised his radio. Find Daniel Harper. But before the deputy could respond, another radio crackled. Sheriff, we have movement near the eastern ridge. Robert turned. Who male subject? He looked at me. Stay here. I watched him leave. Michael remained beside me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, Mom. I looked at him. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it. He nodded. I know. You have to take responsibility. I will. Even if it costs you your business, yes. Even if it costs you your freedom. His eyes filled with tears. Yes. That was the first time I believed him. Not because he promised, because he finally understood that consequences were part of telling the truth. Outside voices echoed across the property. Then we heard a vehicle. A few minutes later, Sheriff Mitchell returned. He wasn't alone. Daniel Harper was walking beside two deputies. His hands were cuffed. His face looked exhausted. When he saw Michael, he stopped. You idiot. Michael stared at him. You almost killed my mother. Daniel shook his head. That wasn't the plan. I stepped forward. What was the plan? Daniel looked at me. You were supposed to sell, and if I refused? He said nothing. Robert stepped closer. Answer her. Daniel looked down. You were supposed to be convinced. By a forged signature, he remained silent. By leaving me in a blizzard. His face tightened. I didn't expect the storm to become that bad. I felt tears fill my eyes. You didn't. Robert took Daniel away. William Hayes was taken separately. Michael remained behind. He looked at me. I am sorry. I nodded. I know. I'll cooperate with the investigation. You should. I don't expect forgiveness. I can't give it to you today. He nodded. But maybe someday. I looked at him. Someday isn't a promise. I know. Then he walked away with the deputy. I stood alone in the snow. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. The storm that had almost taken my life had also exposed everything that had been hidden from me. The forged documents, the conspiracy, the property scheme, the people who had betrayed my trust, and most painfully, my own son. Months later, the investigation uncovered the full truth. William Hayes, Daniel Harper, and several others had been involved in a long-running property scheme. The forged documents were used to pressure landowners into surrendering valuable rights. My property had been the final target because of its access to the underground aquifer. The original survey James had hidden became critical evidence. The county eventually protected the water source, and the affected families were given legal assistance. Michael pleaded guilty to his role in the fraud. He lost his business. He served time. But he also testified against the people who had manipulated him. Our relationship didn't return to what it had been. Some wounds don't disappear because someone says sorry. But one spring morning, almost a year after the blizzard, I received a letter from him. It said, only. Mom, I finally understand that loving someone doesn't mean taking from them. It means protecting what they trusted you with. I'm trying to become that man. I cried when I read it. Not because everything was forgiven, but because maybe someday it could be. I returned to my house that spring. The snow was gone. Wild flowers had begun appearing along the eastern ridge. I stood outside and looked across the land James had loved. For years, I had thought my home was simply a house. Now I understood that it was a promise to my husband, a promise to myself, and a promise to every person who had been told they were too old, too weak, or too alone to defend what belonged to them. I had survived the blizzard, but surviving wasn't the greatest victory. The greatest victory was learning that I didn't have to choose between compassion and justice. I could love my son and still hold him accountable. I could forgive someone someday without pretending they had never hurt me. And I could walk into the future without carrying the shame of someone else's choices. That morning, I stood on the porch, felt the warm spring wind against my face, and whispered, James, I kept it safe. For the first time in a very long time, I felt at peace. Life lesson and final message. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the people we once trusted without question. That kind of betrayal can make us wonder whether love was ever real in the first place. But Katherine's story reminds us that love and boundaries can exist together. Forgiving someone does not mean forgetting what they did. It does not mean allowing them to hurt you again. And it certainly does not mean protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Sometimes the strongest thing an older woman can do is simply stand her ground and say, "This is where I draw the line." Katherine survived because she refused to give up. She survived because strangers chose to help her. She survived because the truth eventually became stronger than the lies surrounding her. And perhaps most importantly, she discovered that being betrayed did not make her weak. It made her more determined to protect herself. If you've ever been hurt by someone you loved, remember this: you can forgive without forgetting, love without surrendering your boundaries, and start over without being ashamed of what happened to you. Your age does not make your voice less important. Your kindness does not make you foolish. And someone else's betrayal does not define your worth. If Katherine's story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Do you think Katherine did the right thing by holding her son accountable even though she still loved him? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. If this story meant something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more stories about family betrayal, courage, and second chances. Sometimes, the hardest storms don't come from the weather. They come from the people we love. But even after the coldest storm, spring can still come.